This is Naomi Judd. On today's show,
I was involved in crossbreeding. I was involved in passing out racist literature. You're actively hating people and looking for ways of killing people.
he spent years preaching hate and bigotry. But Floyd Cochran had a transformation.
I was wrong.
See what he's doing now to make up for his troubled past. Then, he's the child of one of America's most infamous couples.
Behind the scenes in a large, recognizable Christian family is a very messy place.
But Jay Baker isn't letting his family's notorious past stop him from following his own passion. And autism didn't stop Taylor Cross. In fact, it's inspired him to do something great.
My film is about people with autism and how they live about it.
So pour yourself another cup of that good coffee. I'm Naomi Judd, and it's a brand new morning.
Every day's a new day. Every day's a new way to help somebody who needs somebody like you. There's a power you can pass along to heal a heart and make it strong. There's hope with every dawn. Every day's a new day.
So happy to see you all this morning. Thanks for being with me. Hope you got an open mind this morning. I just want to warn you, this show's going to stir you up. I think whether we are willing to admit it or not, when we see somebody or even if we hear something about them, you know, we just kind of make a snap judgment and we think, oh, I get them. I know who they are. Well, there's a reason why we have 2 ears and only 1 mouth. And I think that's so we can listen more and talk less. Did you ever think about that? You're smiling back there like, oh, see, think about it. 2 ears and just 1 mouth. Because when we really begin to listen to somebody, an amazing thing happens. We wind up usually being very surprised. And you have to be reminded of that age-old phrase that you really and truly can't judge a book by just looking at its cover. Now, Jay Baker, he's the son of the fallen PTL founders Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. Woohoo! And he knew that he was going to face a lot of skepticism when he decided to go out into the clergy, not just because of his dubious, notorious family ties, but the guy's got tattoos, he's got body piercings, and a very, very unique style of worship. Yet, despite all the odds, this self-described PK, preacher's kid, is making a big impact, particularly among other young people who are very tired of being judged themselves.
Tonight's called to be seen and respected as holy. Matthew 6, if you're following along in your Bibles. I'm not reading from the translation for some reason. Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them. Got a microphone that says Preacher Man on it. I graduated from being a son of a preacher man to being a preacher man. I'm a son of something. Being the son of Jim and Tammy Faye and being that PK, in a way, is an example and a badge of honor for me that says, hey, I've been through this. I've seen what the worst Christians can do. I didn't get to grow up the normal PK because my dad lost his church when I was 11. So my PK life was from I was born to 11, and then after that, I was the son of a fallen minister. Behind the scenes in a large, recognizable Christian family is a very messy place, and it's very easy to fall into a lot of traps. I partied a lot in high school and in my late teens and until really about I was 20. My drinking was really a problem. It was out of control. I really felt like God really spoke to my heart one day and said, I love you if you're an alcoholic the rest of your life or if you're sober. When I was 19 and I helped start this ministry revolution, I felt that God made a mistake, and that mistake was me. I had to find God on my own. I had to find if he was real.
Everybody's kind of in the midst of sin. We're fallen. We all fall short of God's standard.
But God in his gracious kindness says, you're not guilty because my son paid the price for you. This says blameless sinner, and it's from Colossians 1:22, because it says we've been made holy and blameless as we stand before God without a single fault. Yet, you know, we're fallen, we're all sinners. Love the outcast. This is what the church is for the outcast. The church is for the fallen. The church is for the hurting. The church is for all people, not just the pretty people. Yeah, I still don't feel like I fit into the church. I wanted to start a church that I would go to. We want to create a different atmosphere, but we're still a church, and we're still a place for people to come and hear about Christ and get loved on.
There are people out there searching every day who would never walk into one of our traditional churches, who will wander into one of our services on Monday night.
A lot of people say, well, you're just a minister's kids. You got all these tattoos and stuff, and you're just rebelling against what your parents stood for. And I'm like, not at all. You know, if you want to see radical, go talk to my mom. I mean, my mom, you know, works with the gay community. She works with porn stars, and she loves on those people and shows them Christ. I mean, more than I've ever shown anyone Christ, in my opinion. In some ways, I feel like the childlike faith and the sinners and the outcast get left behind.
I'm Bethra. I come from an artistic background, and I am a tattoo artist and a body piercer. And I come here because I never get tired of hearing about grace.
The attraction is his sincerity and just his realness. Like, that's who he is. Like, regardless of what people think, regardless of what people say, he's being real. And like, that's attractive.
The real mission of Revolution is to let people know that God loves them no matter what, no matter who they are, no matter what they've done. God's called us to make disciples of all people, but through that he loved them. He pursued them. He cared about them. He ate with them. He spent time with them. He celebrated with them. He mourned with them. He laughed and cried. He did all those things with them. Don't get tired of coming here. Don't get tired of hearing about grace. Get excited about it, apply it to your life, and help other people realize who Christ really was and is, and what the gospel really is, and that it really is revolutionary, and that it really is freaking radical and crazy.
Freaky, radical, and crazy. Kind of describes my new sidekicks here.
Yeah,
Except I don't think that you have scriptures tattooed on you anywhere. I'll be willing to bet. We've got psychologist Dr. Jeff Gardier and Rabbi Sherre.
Good morning.
Welcome,
good morning.
Welcome back to our program.
Thank you.
I have heard about this guy, and I'm fascinated to see this piece. You know, he's kind of like he uses his own personal journey, his own testimony, as his witness.
I kept thinking, if I saw him on a street without knowing anything about him, I would judge him. With all those tattoos, and I was walking with my son, I would pull my son a little bit closer.
Yeah.
But then hearing his story, it was hard enough to be a preacher's kid, and now he's really bringing that message to others and speaking to others, which is very powerful.
I think he's so inspiring because what he's doing is he's setting, he's like a model for us, a role model. What he's doing is he's showing us that when you look beyond just the cover, when you look into the soul, there's so much that humans have to offer. There's so much that they have to give. And he's worked through his own individual pain and worked past people judging him, where now he embraces all these other kind of kooky-looking folks who have the tattoos who we would never think might be close to God because of the stereotypes. And he's showing us if he can do it, then we can do it.
And he's
we
helping
really
them enter through their door. I mean,
absolutely.
In a way that other people necessarily wouldn't enter through.
Each of us has something very special to give to the world. And a tattoo underneath here. I
need to see yours.
I may have to call you on that bet there, Naomi.
Tattooed scripture, that's interesting. When we come back, I've been waiting for this, and I know that you're a little concerned about this. Here we go, though. Call your neighbors, tell everybody to gather around for this next segment. When we come back, we're going to meet a man who uses his own troubled past to help children fight back against racism. I'm serious. Call people, tell people to turn on the TV right now. We're going to be right back. Stay with us. Hold that thought. We're going to welcome back our audience here. And now joining me are my sidekicks, of course, Dr. Jeff Gardere, Rabbi Sherre Hirsch. And, well, let me just tell you a little bit about this guy sitting next to me. Talk about a dramatic U-turn. Not so long ago, he was a member of the Aryan Nation. His life was centered on hate. He was focused entirely on discrimination and bigotry against other people. And he's done much more than just reject his past. Now, though, he is creating a positive future with the very folks that he once condemned and discriminated against. Please welcome Floyd Cochran. I want you to start out. We want to get this straight. We want to start from the get-go. You started up in foster care.
Yes.
You were abandoned.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get along with people in my family, so I just somehow ended up in foster care. And actually grew up not too far from here in upstate New York. And well, one day I came, well, there was always that sense of wanting to belong to something. I mean, when you live in foster homes, you don't know when you go to school that day, am I going to come back to the same place at the end of the day? Will I be going to school here tomorrow? Will I be living here tomorrow? And one day I come out of school, and here the Klan was, standing out on the street corner passing out literature.
Because they really target young, impressionable teens.
And they also not only target young, impressionable teens, they also go into communities where they think maybe racism will play. And if you go into a rural area, it might work. And as a 14-year-old, I really wasn't into thinking about hating anyone or judging people. And when the Klan came to my town and was passing out literature, I hadn't seen people in a pointed hat and a long white sheet. So it was more of a curiosity. So I went over and started talking to them. And, you know, it wasn't the racism or the hatred or the bigotry that attracted my attention. It was things like, you know, we're family. Don't you want to be somebody? Don't you want to be a man? And as a 14-year-old, no one said those things to me. I mean, more often than not, they sort of like laughed at me. Now I was part of something that made me feel good, at the expense of making other people feel better or less than human. You know, and again, you just don't go one day from not being somebody who hates to the next day you just wake up foaming at the mouth. I mean, it is a learning experience, and the Klan amplified many of the things I heard from everyday society, be it a racist joke or a racist stereotype, or a politician running for office and wants to talk about crime.
So just for the same reason that people in the ghetto will join gangs, I mean, we join clubs while we're in high school, especially teenagers are desperate to belong.
I'm very glad that you said that, because I've worked with a lot of law enforcement agencies and human rights groups in the last 14 years, and I've tried to convince them that a white supremacist group really is nothing more than a gang. But our everyday racism tells us white people join groups and people of color join gangs. Well, the Ku Klux Klan is a gang. They have turf, they have criminal activities, and is run by a male with a gun. They have instead of a bandana, they wear a pointed hood. So again, why don't we start looking at them as gangs? And maybe that might cut down on some of the recruitment in high schools, elementary schools, and various other communities.
So it wasn't long. You were the spokesperson for the Aryan Nation.
When I finally ended up at Aryan Nations, yes. I mean, I went from the Klan. The Klan was like that entry point into a hate group, and or into the racist movement, what is known as the movement. And after a few years, I moved on to Aryan Nations, one, because I could hate people in the name of God. The Aryan Nations taught that God was a white supremacist. And they also had a compound that I got to live on. And so everybody that I lived with pretty much looked like me. We all wore the same uniforms. We all had the same religious racist beliefs. And the Aryans said, you know, you have an instant recall. These people don't feel threatened around you. You got a pretty good voice. We're going to make you a spokesman. I went from milking cows in upstate New York without a high school diploma to being in Newsweek in like 6 months. So you want to talk about an attraction just in and of itself. I also was involved in not just being a spokesman. Long before I became a spokesman, I was involved in various things. I was arrested for threatening to burn down a synagogue in northern New York. I was involved in cross burnings. I was involved in passing out racist literature. But I also was involved in just saying off-the-wall things when I was in school. You know, I wasn't a member of the honor roll or the band or society, but when I walked into school wearing a T-shirt that said white power, all of a sudden people were paying attention to me. And that's what I wanted really as a kid.
For you.
Oh, very, very.
I
know I
I'm
can see you
momentarily
taking it.
speechless. I've never, you know, I've seen, I know you on, you've been on 48 Hours and Nightline and all that, and I see you on TV, but to have you sitting here with me, it's just, I'm pretty overwhelmed.
I'm overwhelmed, not so much by my own life story and the ability to change, but overwhelmed by the fact that people have accepted that I was able to make a change. And again, you know, I didn't become a white supremacist overnight, and I just didn't one day wake up and say, you know, I'm going to stop hating. It took something very personal after 20 years in the racist movement.
Okay,
and that was being told my son should be killed because he was a genetic defect.
On July 9th, 1992,
14
your son
years ago.
has a cleft palate,
Yes, and the cleft
which is a
lip.
genetic thing. You say you got it from your
My grandfather had it.
his grandfather, and he also has a heart abnormality.
Yes.
And they said, because he's not perfect in the Hitler
Right. Well, you
way
know,
of being perfect, that you should kill him.
It was in 1992, and the Aryans every year around Hitler's birthday have what they call the annual Hitler Youth Festival, where kids from around the country and Canada would come for indoctrination, 3 or 4 days of indoctrination. I was to give a speech, and the Aryans pulled me into the office and said, you know, we understand your kid was born with some sort of handicap. And so I went through that my youngest son, JJ, had been born with a cleft palate and a cleft lip. And they said, well, you know, when we come to power, he's going to have to be euthanized or killed because he's a genetic defect. You know, I was stunned. I mean, here were people that I thought was my family, there was my friends, I was somebody, and here was a belief system that I believed in, and I never made the connection that somehow it was going to affect me on a personal level. And finally something clicked, and that is how on one hand was it wrong to want to kill my son, but it was okay for me to advocate killing people who were different than myself because of race, because of religion, because of ethnic background, or just different than myself. One's not right and the other one wrong. And so I left in 1992. And I certainly want to tell you, and I've said this across the country, you don't go to bed one day as a Nazi and you wake up the next day wanting to hold hands and sing Kumbaya with everybody. I've come a long ways in the last 14 years. I have a long ways to go as a human being. And you know, one of the ways that I have been able to make a change is by reaching out, talking to people, and being able to admit to myself I was wrong. I was a loser for 20 years, and I was wrong for 20 years. And I see a lot of kids who get involved.
Well, let's say you were lost.
I was lost, but I also chose to hang out with losers. As a 14-year-old, you can say, well, okay, you were lost. But when you're in your 20s, and you're actively hating people and looking for ways of killing people, to say, well, I was just lost. No, I was hanging out with losers, and I listened to a losing philosophy.
Well, I'm going to tell you somebody that had a lot of misgivings about you being on the show today. You're sitting next to her.
Floyd, I'm sitting here, my heart is racing. I said to Jeff, it's the first time I feel really nervous. I mean, you're the closest I've been ever as a Jew to someone who was a former Nazi. And I'm sitting here listening to you, and it took me a lot to be here today and to sit next to you. And it's solely because if you don't give a chance, like you said, to someone who really does want to come out of it, and I've seen the difference that you continue to make, and you continue to preach and inspire others to leave the Klan. But I mean, my heart is definitely racing.
But I really respect what you're saying about that. But I'll tell you, I think I've sat next to people like Floyd every single day.
And you just don't know it.
You don't know that because you're judging a book by its cover. You think maybe a place like New York City, because it's so interracial, well, there aren't racists there, and racists are all around us. We need to break that whole mindset of judging that book by its cover, that because you're white, that's why you're racist. There's so many beautiful things about you, Brother Floyd, that I'm so glad that you gave your story, and it inspires me to stop looking in that particular way at certain people.
I don't care what my producer says. We're going to continue having this conversation. This is exactly what we want to do on this show, is build bridges and try to figure out how we can understand each other better. Don't go away. We're just digging in. My head is full of stuff right now. We're back with Dr. Jeff Gardere, Rabbi Sherre Hirsch, and former racist Floyd Cochran. Do you still have trouble? I mean, when you see a Jewish
I was going to say,
person,
like you said, hate doesn't turn over overnight.
Well, obviously, when I first left the racist movement, I guess I would have talked with both of you. but there still would have been that little voice in the back, you know.
Right.
But certainly after 14 years, no. And also in part because I have worked with people in the Jewish community, people in the African American community, and I've gotten to see people that, yes, we may have differences, but we still all have basic human needs, and that's the need to be loved,
here's a news flash.
Food, and
we
place to
all
stay.
still have those little voices in the back of our heads that say, well, can we trust this person who's a former white supremacist?
Right.
What I like that you said, Floyd, and it really sort of confirmed to me that you know there's a difference between being lost and something being wrong, and that lifestyle is wrong. And I think that is an important thing. There are degrees. We have prejudices, but a prejudice of being in the KKK versus a prejudice about what someone eats or what they don't eat is very different.
I want to point out, I hope it's okay to share this with everybody, because I was pestering you with questions during the break too. You say that you're now the target of hate from the white supremacy groups.
I was in Michigan speaking to high school kids this past May. White supremacists came and stood in the back of the room doing these kinds of things. That's a little bit, that's a little bit disconcerting. But you know, I think, and it doesn't mean that I'm nervous when I get threats, but I also think back in my life, how can I say to a person who deals with racism on an everyday level in a way I never will because I'm a white male, and I say to that person, you know, I'm changing, I'm evolving as a human being, but I'm afraid I'm going to go hide. I didn't hide when I was a white supremacist. I went on television, I stood on street corners, but I was very vocal, very active. So again, how can we hide from racism and bigotry?
I want to hear from each one of you all. Why is bigotry on the rise? That baffles me.
In part because fear is an easy thing to build on. We have news networks, we have politicians who use economic issues, immigration issues, various issues to play against one another. There is that undercurrent. Yeah, the media plays a large role in it.
But I think Floyd said it right. I think people feel a sense of lack of community, and they're looking for a place to call home and feel validated and feel important, and that's what the KKK did for you.
Okay, so the fact that our culture feels very isolated and disposable, people don't live in the same communities.
And lonely.
They're lonely, okay.
I think a lot of it is fear. When we use prejudice, when we judge a book by its cover, we're putting out human shields because we say we're going to offer that person up for ridicule or for something to happen to them. I will hide behind them. That's my fear. Things may be bad for me, but it's worse for this person. Kick that person, stomp that person, and leave me alone.
You know, the United States has had a history of having to, especially among the white people, of having to be on a higher rung, having to have someone to look down on. 100 years ago, there was Irish. And the very same arguments I hear today against, quote, illegal immigrants are the very same arguments that were used 100 years ago against Irish. There's always been that desire of, if I go up one step on the ladder, there has to be someone below me, so I have to...
Well, hate has been historical.
And that's what I'm talking about as far as that human shield. Putting somebody else there as the fodder.
What else can, give me some, each one of you, give us something practical that we can do.
I think the more we're involved in our communities, the less we'll have of organized racist groups, the less we'll have of any other type of gang. Becoming involved in our community, becoming involved in our children's lives. Many of the kids I met in the racist movement were such as myself. They didn't have a strong home life. Maybe they didn't have a home life at all. And so become involved with our kids, become involved in our community.
And be mentors and show them how. What do you recommend?
People say all kinds of prejudicial things within their insular communities. You can't do that. You have to stop. It doesn't matter if other people hear it, you can't do it.
Piggybacking on that, we have to set the standard. If we hear our children making homophobic or racist jokes or people in our community, darn it, call them on it.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. Wow. See, this is what we're saying. We all need to listen more.
I may go out and have coffee with this guy, but he's
really?
buying.
And
you're coming
I'm not
too.
there yet.
You're not there yet?
Working on it.
I would love to go. I want to hear more. You just keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
And the longer you do it, the more comfortable Sherry's going to be with you.
Yeah.
We've learned to hate each other in 2,000 years. It's not going to disappear, unfortunately, overnight.
We've been hating for a long time.
Yeah.
You feel better now?
Doing okay.
That's what this show is all about. Listening. All right, well, coming up, we're going to see the work of a young filmmaker who was born a little differently from the rest of us, but that hadn't bothered him a bit because he knows that we're all unique, we're all special. he says that normal people scare him. So there you have it. Today, we're talking about how people aren't always what they seem to be. And our next story is about a teenager who certainly fits that description. Taylor Cross was born with a disability called autism. That's a neurological disorder characterized by difficulty in communicating and forming interpersonal or social relationships. But his challenges have hardly limited him. In fact, they've opened a door to creativity. Taylor made a documentary called, I love this, Normal People Scare Me. Let's take a look at the documentary now.
My film is about people with autism and how they live about it. I want this to be good for the parents who have autistic kids and for the kids themselves so that they understand what is going around in their lives, so it makes it easier and other stuff like that.
Falling down was such an easy trick.
Autism is a confusing disorder. Do you personally understand about what autism is?
Sometimes autism makes people different, but not in a bad or good way.
One person might be blind, one person might be deaf. Well, one person might have autism.
I have to deal with it, but I don't really feel like I have the label with that.
The video that is showing right now is a picture of me when I was 6, and back then I was in my own little world.
Tell me how you feel about having autism.
I feel okay. Like, it helps me with some things that might be hard for others, and then it makes things challenging for me that might be easy for others.
Does it confuse you? And it makes you mad sometimes? All right, it makes you confused, mad? Show me.
Not everybody has blonde hair or blue eyes, or not everybody likes black. I mean, there's just so many differences that it kind of melts together, and autism is just one of those things that is a difference that separates us from other people.
It's so difficult to watch your child grow up. When they're younger, they're sheltered and there's some protection, and the world is more forgiving when you're a child that's young with autism and your behavior is different, bizarre, aberrant, strange. Some would call it weird. But as your child gets older, you watch them walk out into the world that's not as forgiving when they're older.
My journey being your brother, throughout the whole process of being your brother, it's been difficult being around you. And I'm not sure if this is just normal brother or not, but sometimes I feel like you don't really care much about me. But also, it's special being your brother because there's sometimes when I feel that you really do care about me, and it's the little things that count, not the big things. Do you like being mine?
Yeah, you're kind of fun. I still like to bark at you sometimes. Sometimes I wish you'd leave me alone.
It makes me feel different, but technically everyone is different.
Sometimes normal people are scary to kids with autism. They talk funny or too fast. Do normal people ever scare you?
Oh, all the time.
Yes, because it's hard to keep up when people are talking.
Not really.
Yes, they do.
A little, yeah.
Normal people scare me because what is normal anyway?
Normal people scare me when they think they're normal, because in my opinion, there's no such thing as normal.
We may be strange, you may be normal. I mean, you never know. Maybe we're the weird ones and you're normal, Taylor.
And with me now are Taylor's mother, Carrie, his younger brother, Jace, and the filmmaker himself, Taylor Cross. Would you stand up for me?
I'm so tall or something?
You're a long, tall drink of water.
Yeah, I know I am.
And I'm so glad that you're here because I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
Normal people kind of scare me sometimes. Because I'm not sure what normal is. What do you think normal is?
I believe that there is no such thing as normal, because the simple fact that everybody's different, and that's we all want something to achieve for, and that is normal.
Now, when did you find out he was autistic?
We went through the dark. I went through the dark for 6 years, looking for the answer, and it was 6 years old when I finally got the diagnosis from UCLA. Prior to that, it had been a diagnosis, very different diagnoses like mental retardation, refrigerator mother, failure to bond.
Wait, I know what refrigerator mother is, but explain that to the audience.
It's when a mother fails to bond with her child, and the diagnosis was blamed on the mother in the old school because somehow she failed to do her job in properly connecting with her child. And I believe that.
Meaning that they feel like refrigerator mothers sometimes contribute to autism because they're utilitarian and cold.
Correct. And I believed that it was something that was told to me, and I had to fight against because I thought I was a bad mother. And it was 6 years of being in the dark and knowing that it was something else. And finally, it's very painful to talk about. Finally, at 6 years old, I went to UCLA, and the woman said to me, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is we know what you've been searching for. The bad news, it's autism, and it will be autistic for your family and forever. Autism is a spectrum. It's from very low abilities, mid-functioning, and very high functioning, as Taylor is. And so,
Jace, I heard you say that sometimes he doesn't pay enough attention to you, but basically it's the little things.
Yeah, the little things are what count, and all the time when he's maybe saying, no, I don't want to play with you or something, like, maybe I want to play a board game for once because we never play one. And he says no. It feels like he's just trying to get away from me.
They had years where they couldn't connect with one another. They really ignored each other up until about 3 years ago. It wasn't until about 3 years ago that my boys finally connected, and I spent lots of time crying over that.
And what do you
both like a lot of the same things, it turns out.
Say that again?
We both like a lot of the same things, it turns out.
What?
We just never reached out to understand it.
No.
Ah. Are you telling me that sometimes we really need to just not take things for granted, but look for ways that we can communicate?
Too many things for granted.
It perfectly describes what the title of this segment is. It's like, you can't judge a book by its cover, right?
Exactly.
You got to read the book itself in order to judge it.
And don't just read the first page and the last page.
That's right. You've got to learn in between.
I want to hear from you how this documentary has affected you.
If I have never, ever made this film, I would have never met so many interesting people. I would never have gone to any place outside of my own little town or from where I'm from. I say the traveling has done a lot, as like a majority of the changes, because I think my mom would agree with that.
I think we've learned a lot in our travels and in making this film, and for me, in being Taylor's mother. And I think we've learned to see the world with more open perspective, and it certainly helped me to stop judging people the way I used to, because people are all different, the world is different, and Taylor's been able to see the textures of that world and to make decisions for himself that, left to isolation, he may never have been exposed to.
You're obviously such a patient and loving, caring mom, but what has this film done to other people? Has it affected them?
Oh my goodness, it's been the most overwhelming and touching experience. We've received letters from all over the world, from a soldier in Iraq she's a woman, raising a child from a distance, from 66-year-old individuals with autism. The consensus is thank you. Thank you for showing us a world with 70 individuals being interviewed. You get a real cross hibernation. Thank you for showing me what my child thinks. Thank you for showing me who my child is. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much for being with us. May I ask you one last question?
Sure, go on ahead.
And you have to say the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think I'm normal?
No. That's an honest answer. And if you want to know where the where you can buy the film. You might want to go to normalfilms.com, just in case any of you guys are interested, which I know that there will be people who actually are. Go to normalfilms.com.
What's the name of it?
Oh, the name? Normalfilms.com. That's the name of the website. Sorry about that.
And the name of the film is?
The name of the film is, of course, Normal People Scare Me.
And when we return, I sure hope you're hungry for a healthy dose of wisdom, because it's time to go down there to the Day One Diner. So stay right where you are. I'm here with Rabbi Sherre Hirsch and Dr. Jeff Gardier. And of course, when we have food at our house, we're always talking about meaty food for thought. I'm just going to use all my food metaphors I can right now. And I say that everybody in our family is like a salad, all different ingredients that you mix in together. And when you guys get down to the Day One Diner, you just
get into it. I'm telling you, we get into it.
So what'd you talk about?
We talked about how people really judge one another, and especially from the perspective of clergy, how people judge us and how you have to deal with it, and also how we have to teach others to not judge. It's a very, very difficult topic. So you'll hear what we had to say.
Has there ever been a situation in your congregation where you've had to, confront your congregation about stereotypes from the pulpit?
Are you kidding? I live in the Southeast. Of course, there are stereotypes all around us every day.
So what have you had to confront?
Well, I mean, stereotype on race, stereotype on language groups, stereotype on the great Hispanic explosion, especially in southeastern United States, and everybody thinks that these people are a certain way.
Oh, you should see the Jewish community.
Sure.
Persians have these stereotypes. Ashkenazis have these stereotypes.
Yeah.
Everybody, I mean, in our congregation, there's such stereotypes about how these people act in business, and it's so complicated.
So how do you help to break that open? How do you help to create a culture?
My colleague preached from the pulpit once, which I really admired. He said, if you are uncomfortable about your child marrying a Persian or vice versa, get out of the shul, because we're Jews. And I thought that was a very powerful message, and there was silence, because people really had stereotypes. But on a personal note, I just have to tell you, when I first came to my pulpit, there were such stereotypes about women as rabbis that they just stared at me. My first sermon, they were all like, because they just pictured something so different, and out I came with makeup and the whole thing, and they thought, that's a rabbi? That's not a rabbi, so.
I thought that myself, Sherry. No, I'm kidding.
Sure. I mean, how many rabbis do you know that are pregnant?
Sure,
and,
very different.
Now, would you take a stand in your pulpit when you talked about, yes, you're in the Southeast. So have you spoken up about issues of race?
Sure, of course. Yeah, it's wrong. It's sin. I mean, it's ungodly. And
And what kind of response do you get from
Well, you get a mixed response, from people who are spiritual, you get a great response. From people who are really carnal, you get a response of resistance. They really are still hung up on some of the things that were passed on generation after generation after generation. Instead of accepting people for who they are, no matter the color of their skin, their language group, or their background, we tend to want to put people in these pigeonholes that God doesn't have for them.
Scott, jump on in here. We've been quiet here.
Well, I'm thinking about the fact that, that Martin Luther King said that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. And I realize it is, and I've always struggled with whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I realize there are bad pieces of that, but I think there's also something about communities gathering with those who are like themselves and seeing leadership that emerges from whatever their ethnicity is and from their cultural background. And so I'm struggling, with what that means.
In heaven, every tribe, tongue, kindred will all be there together, all worshiping together. And so I believe the best reflection of heaven on earth is a multicultural, diverse congregation that has learned that they can cooperate together despite their differences and show a community a different testimony than we're getting in the world.
The challenge with that
It's a
is that
challenge.
sometimes when we talk about that, we don't deal with issues of power.
That's good.
Because I've been to multicultural congregations, and yet everybody in power is white, but yet the congregation is black and Latino and white.
Well, I think that God has created this wonderful, diverse world universe, and we miss out on so much when we shut ourselves down by stereotyping.
Do you think it's, when they said it's so much quicker and easier to stereotype, you did an audible it's just sort of speed
Yeah,
thinking?
and you were the one who said that, Rabbi.
yeah.
I think it's a situation of where we don't take the time to get to know people.
Yeah.
It takes so much less energy to try to use our brains to understand what people are about or their customs are about. So we just snap off these very stereotypical kinds of thoughts, even to when we think about Asians. Oh, all Asian children are brilliant. Well, there are a lot of brilliant Asian children, but that becomes a stereotype. So even what we think are positive stereotypes can hurt people because we just make them one-dimensional.
You know, country singers, I've been Rhinestone Free for 10 years. And I read the classics and I have on shoes. But we stereotype everybody.
Everybody. I was thinking people make such snap judgments, just even about me. Whenever I'm standing with my husband and we're introduced and they say, you know, this is the rabbi, they immediately go and they shake my husband's hand. And my husband's like, I'm not a rabbi. I'm not that spiritual. Forget it.
You know, there are lots and lots of great topics out there, like the ones we're talking about today. This is such an important topic, such an important thing we need to be discussing with our family. Well, let us know what you think about all this. We want to hear from you. And you can visit our message board, faithstreams.com. We're going to be right back with final thoughts. Back with you. Dr. Jeff, Sherre, and I are now joined by Timberly Whitfield, who's the hostess of our sister program, New Morning, which airs, of course, every weekday here on Hallmark.
You, sister.
You are my sister. I love you to pieces. What do you have coming up on your show?
Well, we were talking about Don't Judge a Book by Its Cover, and we have this great guest on, Roger Troy Wilson, who, if you look at him, or his covers, if you will, he's successful, handsome, has it all, married for 50 years, 50 years, and but there's a whole other story to him. This man lived morbidly obese for many, many years and turned his life around.
You gotta check that out.
Yeah.
Well, that's a heavy story.
Yeah.
Pun
intended.
I was going to say, his wife was with him through thick and thin, and I thought that was bad.
Oh, yeah, all right.
Okay, and I'm surrounded by each of them.
Stick a fork in it, he's done.
Yeah, he's done.
And so are we. Thank you all so much for being with us. You know, so we've been saying whether you're autistic, whether it's your skin, your gender, your race, what part of the country you come from, it's so instantaneous to stereotype. But when you do that, when you prejudice, you prejudge somebody, you completely negate your opportunity. Maybe you're only one to have a very meaningful experience with another human being. I think it's really about listening.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Calming down and settling back. And I'm always telling Wyatt and Ashley, love him first and get to know him later. And people give them a chance to reveal themselves. Well, that takes an open mind. I like that phrase. That's a good phrase, because hope to see you here back with us next week on Naomi's New Morning, where my mind is always open. My door is never closed. And there's always room for you right here, where we have the greatest discussions at my table. Come back.